Thank you again, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. For those of you who have not attended these sessions before, the Project Management Roundtable convenes bi-monthly, and we share and discuss different project management approaches, systems, and policies in the hopes of inspiring new ideas that make us more effective. If anybody has any ideas after this event, please put them in the chat. That anything that you would want to share in any future roundtable discussions, that would be great. I do want to say that we need to, the presentation will end at exactly 1 p.m. And if anybody has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. And at the end of the presentation, I will read out as many questions as I can before we need to sign off. I do want to introduce Alexandra Godowski, who is an associate at HMFH, and she is on the board of IES, and she's going to give us a brief introduction to the presentation we have for everyone today. Thanks, Alexandra.
Thank you, Tracy. For those of you who might not be familiar with the IES Boston and Rhode Island section, we're the local chapter of the Illuminating Engineering Society, which is a nonprofit which is dedicated to the art and science of illumination. And we host monthly educational and social events. And we are absolutely delighted today to be partnering with the BSA to co-host this event. It's always exciting when we can bring different groups of people together. So I'm thrilled today that we have Nora Rizzo today, who works for the Grace Farms Foundation and is their first ethical materials director. She's leading the newly launched Design for Freedom initiative, which she's going to talk to us more about today. Thank you, Nora, so much for finding the time to share your work with us.
Thank you, Alexandra, and thank you, Tracy, for inviting me to speak to these groups today. And I'm thrilled to be here. Bear with me, I'm fighting a little cold, so hopefully my voice holds out. But I'm gonna present today on Design for Freedom, and then we'll leave some time at the end for some Q&A, and we'll be able to get into some of that. I'm going to share my screen. As Alexandra mentioned, I'm Ethical Materials Director at Grace Farms Foundation. I'll talk a little bit more about what Grace Farms is and the work that we do. My background is largely in sustainability and in the construction sector. I'm just going to share my screen. And hoping that looks okay. Great. All right. So this is Grace Farm. This is where I am right now. This is my office. It's a pretty incredible building if you haven't been. We're located in New Canaan, Connecticut. And Grace Farm, the place really is centered on the foundation's mission, which is to end modern slavery while creating more grace and peace in our local and global communities. And you can see here, we're located on 80 acres of beautiful land here in New Canaan, Connecticut. And I'm happy to say that 77 of those 80 acres were preserved as open space, consisting of woodlands, wetlands, and meadows. Only 3 acres of the site was used for construction of what we call our river building, and you can see why it's called that. And Grace Farms is really designed to break down barriers between people and across sectors. And we're really looking at this idea of what is the relationship between the built environment and nature and people, and how are we inextricably linked. We do work at Grace Farms through our initiatives, and they're focused on nature, art, community, justice, and faith, and design for freedom. This is our plaza area, and the idea with Grace Farms really started with the land, and the question was asked, what could be done here to advance good that couldn't be done elsewhere? And then the second inspiration for Grace Farms is really the idea that space communicates, and that drove the need for compelling architecture. You can see here the shape of the river building. It's all connected by one continual roof. It is a LEED certified building, both for new construction as well as operations and maintenance. Was designed by Tokyo-based Pritzker prize-winning firm Sana, and has won many architecture awards. If the enclosed spaces of the river building are 56,000 square feet in total, and the building was built in 2015. These are the original horse farms that were on the property. It was an equestrian facility, and now house our interactive art installations and exhibits. And this is one of my, I love to show this picture because it's one of my favorite spaces at Grace Farm. It's an organic and vegan community garden. And this garden feeds people on site in our commons where visitors can come have lunch, but it also feeds 67,000 of our neighbors in need. To date, we've donated over 300,000 pounds of food to local shelters and community organizations. And that relief work really started during the COVID pandemic when we had to close to the public, but it still continues to this day now that we're reopened again. And we've got 70 varieties of fruits, vegetables, and flowers in raised beds. This is our 700-seat auditorium. You can see our beautiful glulam beams, and that there is no backstage to the stage here in this space. We really pride ourselves in the fact that nature is our backdrop for a lot of our events here on site. And this is our common space where visitors can come and have lunch. Grace Farms is open to the public. It's free. I invite all of you to come visit if you haven't been. It's a beautiful place. You can bring your laptop and do some work for the day. We have just open spaces where people can find a quiet place to sit and reflect and enjoy nature. I do want to mention that we've got 2,000 trees on site and 50 different species. This is a close-up on the right-hand side of our black locust grove. And instead of cutting down this invasive tree species here in the Northeast, this black locust grove is really specifically kept because it's one of the fastest growing hardwoods in our area, and is now kind of an example of a sustainable species that is viewed as invasive, but really because it does grow so quickly and is weather and water resistant, is a great species to use in building and construction. We've also got 80 different bird species on site. And so, as I mentioned, Grace Farms really looks at the built environment's relationship with nature and people. What Design for Freedom is asking is the question of, is your building ethically sourced, forced labor free, as well as sustainably designed? And the answer to that question right now is that we don't know. This examination has not really been happening within our industry. We've certainly seen this kind of trajectory of the last 20 years in terms of social equity and material transparency growing out of the climate justice and action movement and into the embodied carbon movement. And now we're finally starting to talk about social equity as a part of true sustainability and resiliency. So it's great to see that conversation is happening. At Grace Farms and within Design for Freedom community, we're really trying to make sure that it doesn't take another 20 years for this to become kind of standard within our material transparency efforts, what we're looking at. And we do say, that we'd like to be a focus on embodied suffering as much as we do on embodied carbon. So the construction industry lags other industries in terms of supply chain transparency. We can all go to the grocery store right now and pick up any product, know the ingredients that are in it, where it was made, where it came from. We can do the same thing with our clothing. We can see an ingredient label, know that what percentage of materials are in there and where it was made. We don't have that same transparency now for building products, but that is changing. Right now, unfortunately, there are over 28 million people trapped in forced labor conditions today. These include men, women, and children that are working under some form of coercion. And forced labor is really defined as work that is primarily involuntary and under the threat of any penalty. So penalties can include the use of threats of violence or intimidation, debts or fees, retention of identity papers, passports, or threats of reporting immigration status. There are more forced labor victims at this moment than at any other time in human history. And forced labor can be imposed by state authorities, by private organizations, by individuals. And this is really the first time we've seen an increase in child labor over the last 2 decades. We were on a trajectory where we had seen that it was decreasing, but due to climate change and conflicts and crisis and geopolitical situations and school closures and poverty and family income loss, we've seen it go up for the first time in 20 years, which is a little bit discouraging. As we look at the victim population by sector and gender, 71% of all modern slavery victims are women and girls. In the construction sector, it's largely male. And if we look at the construction industry being 18% of all victims, and we look at manufacturing being 15%, and we add in agriculture being 11%, and then we add in mining and quarrying being 4%, we're looking at up to 48% of all modern slavery victims may have some link to the construction industry. And that's very significant. So Design for Freedom is a movement to create a radical paradigm shift and remove slavery from the built environment. We know, most of us on this call probably know that around 45% of all construction costs come from materials. But we're really looking at that material supply chain. We're not, when we talk about Design for Freedom and what does that mean, we're not really talking about on-site labor on a construction. We do know that is happening around the world, and certainly there are issues there on job sites as well. But what we're really trying to focus on is the material supply chain and how and where are those products coming from and how are they getting to the job site, because that's really an area that nobody has been talking about, and that there is no transparency. So if we think about, this is a big problem, how are we going to solve it? We have to really look at the ecosystem built environment. And so this is not something that's going to be solved by designers or contractors or owners, but this is really something that involves everybody within the built environment. So it's manufacturers, it's academic, it's financing, it's legal, it's certainly consumers. So we say that everybody has a role to play in this. Within Design for Freedom, we have a working group where we have 80 plus CEOs, principals, and industry experts. And this is just a sampling of some of our current partners. And I'm happy to say I see some people on the call today. It's nice to see some familiar faces, as well as some people who may be new to Design for Freedom. But this is, you can see that this is quite an array. We've got, again, universities on here, we've got owners, we've got nonprofits, we've got material transparency databases, and certainly designers and contractors. And in addition to that, we do have a lot of university partners, which we think is really important, because educating the next generation of professionals is what's going to help tackle this problem going forward. So not only have we presented to and worked with these universities, we also have dedicated full semester courses with some of them, which is pretty exciting. One of the other central questions around Design for Freedom is, are owners subsidizing their ROIs with slavery? And the answer to that is likely yes. So as I mentioned before, the construction industry is such a huge part of modern slavery. It's also the largest industrialized sector in the world, most disaggregated, least modernized, and the highest at risk of forced labor. The modern slavery criminal industry is valued at $150 billion. So we're talking about a lot of money involved here. And certainly with that kind of market value, we have a tremendous influence and clearly liability in how we're specifying, procuring, and building our projects. And we think that the construction industry is certainly ripe for disruption at the moment. There's an inverse relationship between driving costs lower and then raising the risk of human costs. So when we see product costs go down and decrease, there's a reason that that's happening. And a lot of that is from exploitation. And it's also stifling the modernization of newer products coming to market. And I think that solar panels are probably a really good example of this, where they did get pretty cheap pretty quickly. But the majority of the reason for that is that the polysilicon that's being used in those solar panels is coming largely from regions that are using forced and prison labor. And so we're seeing this kind of the stifling of modernization, and we're seeing R&D dollars dry up. Global laws around the world forbid the use of slave labor, yet our buildings are heavily reliant on slave labor. And The construction industry represents 7% of the global workforce. So that, again, is very significant. These are some of the countries that have enacted legislation to make corporations more accountable. We do have in the US the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, which went into effect in June of 2022, which was really great to see, but again, very specific to a certain region in the world. There's a new law that just was passed this year in Germany, the Supply Chain Due Diligence Act. And this is really a very robust piece of legislation that's focusing not only on forced labor, but minimum working ages, healthy workplaces, pollution, environmental risks and concerns, and applies to all organizations within Germany that employ over 3,000 employees, and then as of next year, any organization that employs over 1,000. So right now, there's estimates that 2,000 companies within that country do not meet the requirements of this act, and things like risk analysis and remediation process, internal complaint procedures, and then due diligence are part of what Germany is asking its organizations to be more transparent about. So it's really encouraging to see this happen. There's also legislation right now proposed in both Canada and the EU at large. So it's exciting to see in the last 5 years that there's been a lot of movement in this space. All forced labor produced goods, as well as illegally logged timber, are prohibited from importation into the US. It's not to say it doesn't happen, but there are laws on the book that prevent it from happening in theory. So these are some of the timber laws around the world. So certainly more specific timber regulation. And just looking at the riskiest products, this is a list of materials at the highest risk for embedded slavery. And they include rubber, glass, vibrant textiles, steel, electronic, brick, timber, stone, copper, iron, minerals, and precursors. And as we look at this list, I think it's pretty clear to all of us that we probably don't spend any time in any structure, whether it's in our personal lives at work or in school environments, that don't contain these materials. So they're pretty ubiquitous throughout the construction industry for sure. So what can we do as designers, engineers, and construction professionals? Design for Freedom released a 100-page report in October 2020, and this is a really useful resource. I encourage you to go online, designforfreedom.org, and download it. It's free, available to everyone. Please use it as a resource and share it. It's not a quick read, but it's got a lot of great information in it. And then in addition to that, just last year, I led the development of the Design for Freedom Toolkit, which takes all of the great research from the Design for Freedom report and puts it into something a bit more actionable. So, once you know the issues and are aware of them, what can be done? Where do you get started? And that's what the Design for Freedom Toolkit really focuses on. Again, available on the same website, downloadable as a PDF. And it's broken out into 3 distinct areas. So it's broken out as education, commitment, and implementation. So if you're there to learn more about material research, there's a section for you. If you're there to learn about how can you be more committed to the movement, there's a section in there. And then implementation is really the tools part of the toolkit in terms of being able to download those specifically as separate resources and using them as you speak with suppliers and manufacturers. So each of the high-risk materials is identified within the toolkit as a separate material. So we've got timber in there, and it's broken out with relevant certifications that are specific to each of those materials. So certainly we see, FSC is on here, which is, I'm sure we're all familiar with, and it's great to see, chain of custody for timber products. And FSC just as of last year started looking at fair labor inputs, auditing fair labor inputs as well for their certification. And something else that was great, I think, about them last year is when the Ukraine crisis happened, they were pretty quick to revoke all certifications from Russia. So it's good to see that, some of these certifying bodies are staying, on top of geopolitical issues, as well as, thinking about conservation. This is specific to timber, but this is a list. So for each of the materials within the toolkit, there is a map of all of the nations producing that particular product at risk for forced labor. With timber, there are forced labor issues around the globe. So we see it in a lot of different countries. Just to note that the US is the second largest importer of timber following China. And in 2018, the US imported $48.7 billion of timber. So again, a huge number. And 38% of all wood products globally are used in buildings and construction. And just to cite that there are headlines around, certainly we've seen it with the Brooklyn Bridge, using when they did renovations, using wood from sources linked to forced labor. And then Lowe's was also identified as selling products that were linked to forced labor. So it is happening, and there is some increased awareness about issues on the consumer level. This is just an image to show you, this is rosewood being harvested in Madagascar, but to just show you, some of these conditions that that workers are working in, and some of the ways that these illegally harvested timber is being done. So also in the report and the toolkit, we look at kind of the highest at-risk timber, not only by country of origin, but also by species, which I think is helpful for anyone who is thinking about sourcing wood and wants to reduce their risk where they can. And then for each of the materials in the toolkit, it is also broken out by percentage of global consumption and production. So you can kind of get a better sense of what the supply chain actually looks like. And just thinking about, as we see more and more buildings being built with mass timber, and certainly some of these taller timber towers, there's going to be an increase, I think, in how much timber we're sourcing, which we already know is a lot. So I think this is an area that we need to pay particular attention to. Another product that's highlighted in the toolkit is mica. And mica is a particularly high-risk product because it shows up in so many different, a high-risk material because it shows up in so many different products. It's included in a lot of cosmetics, plastic, rubber, paint, electronics, and over 15,000 parts of within the auto industry. So mica producing countries here are defined. Madagascar and India are the two highest risk locations, but they're also the two biggest exporters globally. And this is a particular area where a lot of child labor happens. So children are working in, sometimes these artisanal lines, they're certainly working underground. A lot of them don't have tools or light or ventilation. And in Madagascar alone, it's estimated that 10,000 children are working in hazardous conditions in mica mines alone. And 70% of India's mica population, India's mica production is estimated to be from sources of illegal mines. So again, it's unfortunate that the biggest global producers are the highest risk. So mica mining itself is considered the most hazardous work and the worst form of child labor. As I mentioned, mica is used in many different materials, but certainly within the construction industry, it shows up in gypsum, joint compound, paints and coatings, countertop, electronic equipment. I mean, anything that has kind of a sparkle or sheen to it, you can pretty much assume that there's mica in there. Textiles is another material that we look at in the toolkit. The good news about textiles is that there are many certifications that look at textiles, and they're just a sampling of that. And that's because as I mentioned earlier, the apparel industry is really kind of a few steps ahead of us in terms of material transparency. So because textiles is an overlap between the apparel and the construction industry, there's certainly a lot more certifications. There's a lot more due diligence being done in this space. But when we think about, shades, wall coverings, furniture, flooring, this is where there is that overlap. And so where we see textiles come in, and certainly cotton, carpet, jute, and silk are high risk materials. And here you can see global hotspots for textiles in terms of forced and child labor. Glass is another material we look at, and certainly specific to a lot of people on the call today. It is one of the few materials that we found that has no relevant certifications that include third-party audits for fair labor. So this is the one material that's in our toolkit that doesn't show relevant certification. So if anybody has found anything out there, we'd love to talk more about that, but we haven't been able to find anything in our research. And we've, it's unfortunate because we really are seeing this increase in glass use throughout renovation and construction. So just like Kimber, we're seeing an increase in this particular material. Copper is another one that is a high-risk material, but has some good relevant certifications. The Copper Mark is a great new certification, and Responsible Mineral Initiative does some really good work with a lot of metals that are mined. So with copper, one of the overlaps between sustainability and conservation and social equity is where these mines are located. There are only 400 copper mines around the world, and when I found that number out, I thought that was really low. But it's such a specific. It's a metal that's located in just very specific locations. 65% of undeveloped copper reserves are located in close proximity to biodiverse conservation areas. So as these mines expand and grow and more copper needs to feed certainly the construction industry as well as the tech industry, we're going to see kind of those mines encroach on some of this land. And 47% of all mines are in close proximity to indigenous peoples' land, which is another specific concern in that these mines are expanding because these pockets of copper, again, are just located in certain areas around the world. So those mines need to expand in order to increase production. As I mentioned, the Copper Mark, there's currently 30 mines that are certified to the Copper Mark. It's a great tool and resource. So if you are sourcing copper, I would encourage you to see if you can get Copper Mark certified copper. None of the hotspot countries have certified sites. So at least, that kind of holds true to the research that we're seeing, but Mexico does have 3 that should be coming online soon. So that's encouraging. Steel and iron, again, huge parts of the materials that we build with. There are some good certifications related to these materials. And steel really combines with tensile strength with low cost, but it also comes with a high human cost. And this graphic really illustrates how many different, raw materials are going into steel production. And when we think about, charcoal and where that's coming from, and thinking about trees being involved in the steel, life cycle, it's kind of incredible to see, how many different transformations happen. But there are many, potential forced labor issues along the steel supply chain because it does contain so many different raw materials. And steel production averages about 2 billion tons per year, and approximately half of that is coming from Chinese mills. Global hotspots again for steel. And as I mentioned earlier, I mentioned solar panels a little bit earlier, but we talk a little bit more in the toolkit about polysilicon, and I think it's important to highlight just, as an example of kind of this monopoly on certain commodities. 45% of all the global polysilicon supply comes from one specific region in China, and that is the Xinjiang region. And that is where the Uyghur population has been put into forced labor conditions and detention camps and separated from their families. So thinking about 45% coming from what we know is a very high risk situation. In June of last year, as I mentioned, the Weaker Forced Labor Prevention Act went into place. And the good thing that we've seen come out of that is that just since June, over $1 billion of goods have been detained at US ports because they are suspected of having forced labor coming from this specific region in China. And that's something that was not happening, certainly on that scale, in our port before. So these companies are now being held accountable to prove that their products don't have forced labor in them. And that's a very extensive legal process. So it's not great that we're going to see some more supply chain issues, certainly in terms of solar panels and cotton coming out of this region. But I think that this is a necessary piece of legislation that was long overdue. So it's good to see that this is actually happening. And right now there's over 1 million Uyghur people being held in forced labor conditions just in this one area of China. And unfortunately, right now, only 5% of the global supply is provided by US-owned companies. So that's our materials section of the toolkit, just kind of some highlights there, but then we really do go into relevant certifications, labels, and standards. So this is a list of a few dozen certifications, labels, and standards that are relevant not only to those specific products, but maybe to a company. So a company can be B Corp certified. So it's broken out by product certification, supplier certification, and corporate certification. So I encourage you to take a look at that. I think it's a really helpful list. And then we've got additional resources as well. So these are not specific certifications, but really, we've aggregated kind of our go-to resources that we look at in terms of forced labor metrics, global hotspots, what's happening, in other areas of the industry. And so these are great resources to look at. Looking at the tools within the toolkit, we've got these separated out as separate downloads on the website, but you can download a supplier outreach letter. This is really great when people say, okay, but where do I get started? This is a great starting point to just start the conversation, to start the advocacy, to start the outreach with a particular supplier. It explains a little bit about the problem, talks about why you're getting involved in this, and then has links here for additional resources. There's also a supplier questionnaire on there. My goal is to get this into an editable form, and then we can start kind of aggregating some of this data. But this is a great starting point to start talking about, fair wages, codes of conduct, ethics policies with your suppliers. There's 3 links in this questionnaire, and there are 4 living wage calculators that cover pretty much the entire globe, which is great to see because I think it's really hard to look at wages in other countries and know, what's a living wage and what's not. And I encourage you to go on here and just look at a living wage for your region, where you live and work. I think you'll be surprised at how short the US falls in many areas there. For those of you who deal with specifications, we do have a sample Division 1 spec for ethical design requirements, and this was put together with Gensler. They helped us work on this. And this is really, putting it right into the bid document so that contractors know exactly what's expected of them in terms of this due diligence. And then to wrap up the toolkit, we do have steps to an ethically sourced project. I know people love a good checklist. This is our attempt at that. So take a look. And then, we're also doing this work. So we're not just putting this out there and saying, try and figure it out. We know we don't have it all figured out on our end, but we're certainly being very proactive about trying to have more industry knowledge in terms of what's working and what's not for due diligence. So our Design for Freedom pilot projects accelerate awareness, initialize ethical material transparency, and add to the industry's body of knowledge. And our goal is really to transform the market. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, we do have this really great purchasing power as an industry. And so we need to leverage that. Our pilot project locations right now, we've got 3 in the United States, 1 in the UK, and 1 in India. This was our slate of pilot projects for last year. We're just getting ready to announce our new slate of 2023 pilot projects, so stay tuned for that. We last year worked on the 21st Serpentine Pavilion in London with Theater Gates, who designed this, Black Chapel, and Grace Farm served as the responsible material advisor. We looked at the concrete, the timber, steel, the plywood, and the waterproofing membrane on this project. And we're pleasantly surprised that the UK suppliers, I think largely due to the UK Modern Slavery Act, were a little bit ahead of what we've been seeing with some of our US suppliers. So we traced products through 16 different suppliers on this project, and materials were sourced from low-risk countries and included relevant certifications that we wanted to see. We were able on that project to get back to the point of raw material extraction for many of them. So if you want to dive a little bit deeper into that one, on our website we do have a project brief on the Serpentine that it's just a one-page document, but you can get some more information on that. The New Canaan Library in the same town that I'm located now is opening up in February, just next month to the public. So super excited about that. This is a project we worked on with Turner Construction and Centerbrook Architects. The task on this project was that each subcontractor had to trace one of their materials, one of their products. So we ended up tracing 24 products on this project. And at the beginning of the project, Turner issued specifications for Design for Freedom to over 300 of the subcontractors bidding on the job. So a great way to gain, to advocate for this throughout the industry. This is a pilot project that we did just here on our site. This was a 1-year temporary art installation called Temporal Shift, really looking at the intersection of time and light. And we traced the concrete, rebar, and steel. And I would love to say it's 100% forced labor free, but even on a tiny little project like this, we cannot make that claim. And I think that just highlights how difficult it really is looking at these materials. Because rebar is so highly recycled, it was nearly impossible to break it out any further than its post-consumer recycled content. But everything else was sourced up. This is the Harriet Tubman Monument, which will open in March in Newark, New Jersey. This is replacing a Christopher Columbus statue that was taken down. We are working with Nina Cook-John, who is the architect on this. And I think one of the great things about all of our first slate of pilot projects that I've shown you is that they're all open to the public and free and accessible by everyone. And that was really important to us. And, in terms of equity and in terms of creating these beautiful things, but making sure that people could enjoy them. This is just it show you a breakdown of Temporal Shift and the different materials. And then lastly, our last project from 2022 is a new Center for Arts and Culture by Serendipity Art. And this will be located in New Delhi. This is a very large project. It's going to be scaled over many years. It's again open to everyone, accessible by all. We'll have millions of visitors per year. And so we're just now really getting into construction on this and very excited about our partners in India and starting to think, knowing that India is a high-risk location, starting to think more about how we can be sourcing materials a little bit differently while still contributing to the local community and economic development. I do want to highlight our Design for Freedom Summit that is coming up on March 30th. This is our second annual. I'm sure I know many of you on the call came last year. I do hope that you're able to join us. We'll be here at Grace Farms. It is a day-long summit where we talk about all things forced labor, material transparency, the business case for Design for Freedom. We have panels and roundtable breakout sessions, and you can register on our website, and the early bird rate ends February 7th. So we've harnessed the knowledge and insight of our partners and team to advance a non-negotiable challenge that every building should be designed and built for freedom. And we like to say that once you know, you can't unknow it. So unfortunately, you know now, and we are asking all of you to be responsible and to take action. And that's the end of my show. So I will stop sharing and I'm happy to take any questions.
I have one question, Nora. Thank you so much. What happened to that labor force with these supply chain disruptions? We're buying less of those high-risk products or materials, but then are they just routed somewhere else?
Right. So, I mean, and that's something that we talk about a lot, right? We're not really looking to eliminate entire, countries. We're not looking to say that we're not going to source and leave out maybe the suppliers who are doing the due diligence. What the toolkit is really, doing is just highlighting that more due diligence needs to happen if you are sourcing from these particular locations. You need to be more vigilant about it because the risk is higher. So we are working with, we love to see remediation. We love to see that there are corporations right now who maybe have identified forced labor in their supply chain and are working with those suppliers to make sure that they're paying a living wage, make sure that workers aren't, stuck in a vicious cycle of never paying off a debt to a recruiter, to make sure that they're working in safe conditions, to make sure that they have access to healthy workspaces and to housing, and are being equitable to their employees, and beyond that to all of their suppliers as well. So I appreciate that question. I do know, it's tricky when some people say, well, what happens when we just cut out somebody from the supply chain? Obviously, they're going to find a buyer somewhere else. So we're really looking at what does remediation look like. There are some great organizations out there right now, like FAST. They're identified in our toolkit as a resource. They're really working on this survivor initiative where, how are they setting these people up to continue to have good paying jobs and living wages. So I think there is some work being done in that space, and we're certainly working with organizations who are doing that now.
Thank you. We have about 15 more minutes left. Does anybody else have any other questions? I don't see any in the chat. So, hi, Sarah.
Hi. Yeah, I'd love to. First, thanks everybody, or thank you for the background. The unfortunate truth that you ended with is once you learn it, you can't unknow it. And I had the fortune of being on at a Built Environment Plus event with Lisa recently, and just kind of like planted the seed. And I went, "What do you mean slavery? Are you serious?" Like it's very unfortunate that it's not a bigger part of the conversation. So I'm with that foundation, I'm glad to know to try to be working toward it. But for us in particular, we're working with affordable housing, and budgets are limited. And as you pointed out, rightfully, because of that constraint, we're unknowingly kind of encouraging this system and really suppressing the cost of the material, the true cost of the material, let's say. And there's a lot of implications with that because we're getting money from taxpayers, from the government. So basically we have like state funded slavery, if you were to like really abstract it. But we can't increase our budget. So I'm a little curious, just in your travels so far, have you seen that there's a significant correlation, or could you even maybe monetize? Is there a percentage more that non-forced labor product is coming in? Is it as simple that nothing is simple, but can you like say, well, if I'm paying more, I can have a little bit more hope that there's ethical business practice on the way, or how do we know?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question. It's, of course, very specific to what products and materials we're talking about. But certainly when you're dealing in the affordable housing space, obviously we know budgets are tight. We also know that this is illegal, right? So for the federal government to be sponsoring, this means that they're complicit. We are working with GSA, we are working with the State Department, and talking about how they're evaluating, kind of their verified and vetted contractors and suppliers, because this is very important to them to make sure that our tax dollars essentially are not being, are not funding these things. So I think it's great that people are very conscious about the bottom line. I'm not going to lie. It's very true that there are products that are very cheap, and there's a reason that they're very cheap. And I think we see that in our daily, daily consumer lives, that we know that, when we're making that decision, we know that, there's a reason something costs half as much as a similar product. But I will say, in terms of the due diligence and just looking at material transparency, the delta is really in the time it takes to do that work. So we're not specifically seeing that every single product costs more money. What we're seeing is the time to evaluate these things is where, where the dollars are being spent. So if you have a dedicated person on your team who maybe has a sustainability background and is looking at other things like EPDs and verifying products already, it's not that much more of a lift to do a little bit more, on the due diligence side to try and gain more insight into where materials are coming from, what certifications they have. And it's also really about just having the conversation so that suppliers hear it not just from us in our pilot project, but hear it from everybody to know, oh, people are starting to pay attention to this. Maybe we should start to be more proactive as manufacturers, as a community, to provide this information up front. And we're starting to see that with manufacturers, which I think is really exciting, is that they're coming to us saying, we haven't yet had any requests, but we know it's coming. We want to be ready. So I think, in terms of just doing the legwork, that's really where the majority of it is in time, which we know costs money.
Victor has a question. Is there a difference? Are you distinguishing between forced labor and slavery?
Yes, so that's a great question. Forced labor really falls under the umbrella of modern slavery. So it's called modern slavery to really differentiate and distinguish itself from chattel slavery, which obviously we know our country was founded on. So very distinct from that, but modern slavery is all encompassing. So modern slavery includes forced labor, child labor, human trafficking, debt bondage, prison labor. So it's modern slavery is really the umbrella term, and then these are more specific situations of exploitation within that. And so there also in the toolkit there's kind of a mini dictionary that goes into each of the different types of slavery and gives definitions for each.
Thank you, Nora. As more people and firms are taking the time to do this research, is that learning being shared so that others can know what products are good to look for or have been vetted by others? Thinking mindful materials could be a good avenue for sharing this info.
Absolutely, and we are a partner of Mindful Materials. They're on our working group. They will be here at the summit. So yes, we love Mindful Materials, actively working, worked with them prior to the beta launch of the portal to really think about how does forced labor fit into material vetting for sustainability. So yeah, working with Mindful Materials as a partner. The other part of that question, I think, is that we have partnered with an organization called Sustain Chain, and they work only with companies who are addressing at least one sustainable development goal by the UN, so the SDGs. Because we specifically look at target 8.7, which is forced and child labor, we are on that platform. So we're building out a portal with Sustain Chain now, which will be open to everyone. And we'll send that out to our community at large. It will also be linked to our website, and people will be able to go there and talk all things designed for freedom and then some. We'll be able to hopefully aggregate our shared knowledge base on there. Certainly people will be able to upload specific research that they're doing and look for partners who are maybe doing the same thing. Very important to us that we don't continue kind of siloing the work and effort that everyone is doing. And I think that Design for Freedom is in a really great position because we are a thought partner. So it's really important for us that we bring everybody together to solve this, because it is a massive, massive problem, as we know.
Okay, we still have a few more minutes. I don't see any further questions in the chat. So does anybody have any last questions for Nora? Okay. This section is being recorded and it will be available up on the BSA website at some point in the near future. I want to thank Nora and Alexandra for helping us host this event. It was truly inspirational and informative for us. So I am also going to be saving the chat. If anybody has, again, any great ideas that they want to either do a presentation on or have any thoughts about any further project management roundtable sessions, please feel free to reach out to Rosalind Child and myself, who are the co-chairs, and we will be happy to get back to you. I want to thank everybody for attending again, and I hope everyone has a great afternoon.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate all the questions.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.